Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Tanween, for the invitation to Robert and Sultan. They are here. Thanks. So in this presentation, I will explore Fabric's models of the social playground as spaces of protest that negotiate particular urban and political contestations and hierarchies in a site or place. So some of these models occur outside designated spaces of play, such as the playground and part of everyday life. And as such, I will explore or link play to theory of spatial practice, theory of space and everyday life, to provide a framework to what we call public play practices, which is the topic of our workshop this week here in Dammam. So I'll start with play, playfulness, and protest. Playfulness as a disposition is most attributed to children and their practices of play. Children play with everything. They use their imagination to interrupt the everyday and to ask, what else can I do with this? Whether an object or situation, a child will subvert it, break its order, and invent it as new. So that play and playfulness are part of a diverse range of social and spatial practices across age, gender, cultures, and occurs in different urban settings, private or public, such as playing with limits, or playing with ideas, or playing with words. Stuart Lester defines play as a state that continuously questions bodies, space, and materials to see what more can be done with them. Colin Ward adds that play is a politically charged, non-conclusive practice of breaking order on a small scale in everyday life. And he further articulates that play is a form of protest that may be low-key, exercised through spontaneous, impromptu, and resourceful acts that stake a claim for modest redistribution of time and space. So there are two types of play, as Roger Caillois notes. The first, called regulated play or ludos, and follows rules set by others, and the second is self-directed play, pedia. So these two practices are somewhat in conflict. The main difference is that pedia is ambiguous and unpredictable. It is a practice that unfolds through the process of playing itself, prompting dynamic responses to surrounding, restrictive, or unfamiliar conditions. So further, it creates and then amends its own rules, simultaneously subverting existing ones. So these distinctions among play practices parallel those noted in spatial practice as defined by Michel de Certeau that produces everyday life. That is the difference between spatial practice as strategy and spatial practice as tactic. So strategy for de Certeau is always the domain of power, while tactics are unpredictable actions of protest or resistance by the powerless. Tactics are articulated through spontaneous and continuous adaptations, such as self-directed play in breaking the order, that have been created by strategies of power. These are rules set by others. So these are some of the conceptual ideas behind our work in Fabric. And in Fabric, we propose that an activity approached with a playful mindset and taking place in the public realm is a tactic of protest because of its ability to subvert, to continuously pose questions, and to break established orders. So these playful tactics of protest used in different urban settings with the aim of negotiating conflict, often at a very small scale, and they are ways in which we play a part in the making of our cities. And we refer to these activities as public play practices. So here, practice of play become operative outside the domain of play itself and entering the city's sociopolitical field or life. So through a series of site-specific and socially engaged art projects, art and design, in the Middle East, primarily in Palestinian refugee camps, and the UK, Fabric has developed a series of models of social playgrounds that look at the potential of play as a mechanism for negotiation and protest outside the playground and within the city, to promote or propose public play practices. And we take clues from Leanne Lefebvre, who notes the playground as the smallest stitch in the urban fabric, one that ensures its cohesion with specific strength in connecting people to spaces. So the research of the social playground highlights the resistance to abstract political notions in the tangible everyday situations and from the view of children and through them their families. But what type of play is protest, particularly in our work of the social playground? So this diagram, scale of play, uses our different models of the social playground to explore why do we play on a scale from play for play towards play with a purpose. So while all the play practices mentioned here are politically charged, some are more intuitive, where the protest is inherent and subtle, while others are more intentionally subversive, with the protest more politically propositional. And what is helpful about this diagram for us is to analyze our methodology of play and visualize the role of play in each of our projects. So the type and scale of protest it holds at each stage of the project, who is it by and how is it done. And we observe on that scale play for happiness, to follow a curiosity, for example, to make a friend, or play as a cultural practice to bring community together or to respond to limited resources. And I will talk more now about these examples. So we discovered that play can be about play itself and can function as a form of protest too against social ideas, representations, authorities, and processes of decision-making in the public realm. So I will discuss some of the social playground models used in this diagram, and we'll start with the hidden playground. So our project Play Space in 2005 is a good example of how public spaces in Burj Barajni, Palestinian refugee camp in Beirut, were transformed by children into a social playground. So I'm talking here about their existing play practices, as the children search for spaces to play in the absence of any childhood spaces within the camp. Seeing the camp as their play territory, the children established a hidden topography of play through their creative reuse of the architecture around them, taking inspiration from the ambiguity of the broken, the incomplete, and the absent. For example, Muhammad Ali's game titled Grandma's Washing Plane Race. He invented the game when his grandmother visited them every Monday to do her washing, and the washing lines on the rooftop created boundaries for Muhammad to cross through his paper plane. So this is Muhammad Ali's play manual as a research document that we worked on it with him that can now be given to anyone, enabling them to play his game and create a similar spatial environment. So children's invented patterns of play, or their public play practices, were acts of protest because while the children had the least claim to the space, they managed to insert their playground fleetingly and frequently into public spaces and in between the functions or programs of others, mainly adults. So these insertions revealed how different community groups used and appropriated the space and how they engaged with each other. The second one, I will talk about the programmatic playground. So the research into the children invented play and the hidden playground led us, like fabric, to propose with the children new play spaces. So children pointed out things that are not working in the camp, such as leaking water, the poor infrastructure, unemployment, and things that are lacking, such as designated spaces for play. So the children's temporary art installations created what we call the programmatic playground. So these are our art installations that we produced with them. So these kind of programmatic playground, they suggested alternative solutions and institutions for the camp, infrastructure and public spaces. So for example, in this image, Motanturi proposed a drawing device using leaking water that they collected to make or to mark children's play territory. Another one, the shadow garden and the floating bed by Isra and Maha, offering workers and unemployed men a place to nap. The traveling exhibition in a box by Jamal and Bilal that moves across the camp and brings children artifacts and stories from around the world. The unexpected theater, here Mo wanted to be a magician and he created a pop-up theater space in a parking lot for magical events and surprises. The Watchtower of Happiness, more metaphorically, Moradwan wanted to go up to the highest place to find the sad children from their windows through his magical-looking device in order to help them. So here you can see the chair play structure creating a dialogue with the adult social space made up also by chairs behind them. And the physical occupation of space by these proposals and their attachment on to adult spaces are instrumental in creating direct discussions or negotiations or protest around them with the community and to put forward children concerned to be taken seriously by adults in the camp and by those involved in policy making, such as the authorities, NGOs, and urban planners. So the process also showed the children what they could achieve within their immediate space and with limited resources. So from that point, we further explored different models that the social playground can take to negotiate different scales of contested space and different hierarchies. Such as proposing the fragmented playground for the public spaces of Nahr al-Barid camp in North Lebanon after its destruction in the war in 2007. So the proposal was part of the camp reconstruction project and responded to the camp dense urban living and the lack of designated play spaces. So this meant that the playground is fragmented in the camp spaces and appropriates existing architectural elements such as handrails, windows, edges, and staircases to become multifunctional and intergenerational play spaces or spaces. So the fragmented playground declares different groups' rights to space and the sharing of space at different time of the day and by different gender and age groups. So in a different context, in the Talbiyi camp in Amman, Jordan, the social playground took a different form. We were given a site to intervene in, part of the camp development project by the UNRWA, and we worked on a similar participatory process with the children and their families, and we proposed the Edge of Play, which is a play space for children and a space for women to meet and wait for the distribution of rations from the UN office. It's also a wedding space when covered with traditional metal and fabric awning. So the construction of the Edge of Play brought loud negotiations to the construction site, transforming it into a conflictive playground, which led to the closing down of the space and fencing it. And here the main reason for the opposition of the space is that it replaced the space of a resident parking space, and it was also argued that such a public space could attract males to the site and therefore infringe on women's privacy. So the permanent and large-scale nature of the interventions or the protest in the last two camps or the last two models of the social playground, in comparison to the children's temporary art installation that I presented previously, meant entering into the realm of the political, and as a result, the suspension of the social playground as spaces of negotiation. So now moving to a very different context, to London, and one of the main concerns our work addressed in the context of a housing estate in London is how can familiar urban settings that are underused and unappreciated become sites of curiosity. So through Fabric's collaborative project at the South London Gallery in 2010 and 12 here, the Shop of Possibilities was developed. And it was an invention studio and a compressed playground set up at the So Garden housing estate in Peckham in London, in South London. And so we worked with the children from the estate, so worked together to create a series play kits made of objects collected from recycling of residents at the estate. Inspired by the ready-made and the loose parts concepts, the invention shop unfolds to occupy and reactivate forgotten public spaces in the grounds of the estate by installing social toys and games to invite the residents and make friendships. So the personal histories and the stories of the invented games were documented in the archive room of the shop. And I will present the last model, which is the action playground, which involves the public actions of young people on a market street in London and in various locations. So their actions of protest include sitting on the pavement, scaling a wall, climbing on traffic cones, and walking in the middle of the road, to mention a few. So they made commentaries on the way the youth were excluded from the public realm by them extending boundaries and claiming territories. So we hope that this talk has examined the potential of play in the public realm as a mechanism for encouraging public play engagement and as a social activator on a small scale in everyday life. So by looking at the social playground within and outside the traditional playground as a public social space, we understand how communities operate, how they innovatively respond to limited resources, and how they negotiate the right to space. So the social playground also reveals programmatic aspiration through the way the children and their families have engaged with these spaces, adjusting them and reimagining their potential. So the social playground open up a space for people to protest against existing conditions, instigate processes of resettlement, especially in the camps, and exercise notions of belonging. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamad, for a very inspirational project that you are working on.
Thank you.
And now I would like to open the space for everyone. If you have any questions for Mohamad, to raise it. He showed different nice scenes for the kids, how they are being really smart about the games that they want to play with whatever minimum resources and tools they have. So any question? Yes, we have here.
Thank you for your talk. I'm wondering, how open were the parents when you were dealing with these situations and these installations to having their children participate in unusual projects, and also because it seems like some of those camps may have seemed to be possibly a bit dangerous or possibly unwelcoming to them, not exactly child-friendly as Lulu's presentation was describing. So I was just wondering how open they were to that, if that was a struggle you had.
I mean, we usually start the projects with a series of workshops. Let me take this. And we enter the camp through kind of collaboration with cultural institutions that already exist there. So there's kind of a network that we operate within, which kind of facilitate our engagement with the children and their parents. I'm not sure how dangerous I mean, these are refugee camps in Beirut. There is a bit of military presence in refugee camps, in some of them, particularly in the one in Lebanon. But again, because we enter with kind of collaboration with internal institutions that kind of facilitate that interaction. And families usually, or entering kind of the space of children or through them, it's kind of a more an accessible, an easy way, or a smart way of entering the camp and their families through them in a way. So it was an interesting point to work also with the families through the starting point of working with the children. So they become the access actually to their families too.
And maybe you agree with me that the theme itself also helps to talk about like the games.
Yes,
and
because it sounds a very kind of non-political
exactly.
issue. So it's a kind of a good entry to address through it bigger problematics about space to start with, and more about the representation of people in their spaces. So it's it's a playful tool.
It's a playful tool. Any other question for that? Maybe I have a question if no one. Do you have? Oh, okay. Mr. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your talk. My question is about who funds this work and what are they funding? Are they funding the specific, are they using the language that you're using about playful space as a protest, or is that the lens that you bring to it?
This is us. This is our reflection on these projects over 15 years. So this is something just to mention that these projects that I showed today, they've been in development for 15 years. We started in 2003 with very small fund. I think my partner Reem here, you remember, knows better. So it was like initiative between friends, us. So she invited me to the first project with money from, very little money. But there is a very small fund. It's like a very small fund from cultural institutions in Lebanon, and even from family and friends, or we should say it, family and friends. And they are very small budget project. But then after building a bit of portfolio from these kind of initiatives, then we get invitation from, been taken seriously from people are working with bigger budgets such as the UNRWA. So we've been invited to apply our method of work in different contexts. So here the fund started changed and working more with institutions as an invitation. And later on in London, because the cultural institutions are more established, this is another entry. So it's been kind of a longer process with collaborations, and through them the kind of the ideas, the conception of it start to develop in relation to the context. So the urban context helped a lot in developing the concepts of these models, if this is what the question is about.
Thank you so much for answering the questions. Please help me thank Mohamad for the second time for having him on stage. Thank you.